All right, so today's presentation, we are going to touch on intermittent fasting. Is it the silver bullet or is it just another fad diet? For those who don't know me, my name's Anthony, and I'm the functional nutritionist and master coach here. And I'm really looking forward to going on this journey with you today and just demystifying intermittent fasting. So we're going to touch on a few different things today. So first thing is I want to go into a little bit of the history of intermittent fasting and really touch on the different types of fasting that there is in terms of the schedules. We're also going to break down the benefits. We're going to have a look at the drawbacks also, and then what situations you should be using intermittent fasting. And really, we want to get a really balanced view of the benefits fasting can have, but also identify some of the drawbacks that may be there. All right, so let's look a little bit at the history of fasting. So we've been fasting since the start of civilization, and it hasn't always been by choice. We would have had periods of feast, periods of famine, which would really dictate our fasting schedule. It wasn't something done by choice. But we've always had a slight fascination with fasting, even dating back to ancient Greece. Scholars like Plato, Pythagoras, they would use food restriction to try to increase their health and also increase their mental clarity. It's also shared in different cultures for spiritual, emotional, and health reasons. If we're thinking here around the different types of cultures, Muslims have Ramadan, Christians have Lent, and different religion and spiritual practices use fasting for that purpose. Also, if we look at different types of monks have used it for protesting, leaders such as Gandhi also used it for political purposes. And so we really started the research on fasting in the 1900s. And so this really began on rats, and the result is that they lived longer. So the rats did live longer. The only thing is when they tried to transfer and do some testing on humans, it was the fasting regime that they used on rats was way too aggressive, and there was ethical concerns. So this is really where the intermittent fasting was created. So not just straight out fasting, this intermittent pattern. It was a less harsher approach, and it allowed us to get some really good research there. So that's a little bit of the history of fasting. Now let's look at the different types of fasting. So there's different types of schedules here. So any sort of calorie restriction can be, even skipping a meal can be classed as fasting. But the more notarized types of fasting are things like the 16-8, so the intermittent type, where it confines to 8 hours a day of an eating window, and then you would usually do about 16 hours fasting. There's also 1 to 2 day full fast, and so that entails not eating for 28 to 48 hours. Then we've got the 5-2 diet, which is you eat normally for 5 days, and then you have a restricted calories for 2 of the 7 days of the week. The ketogenic diet is also classed as a type of fasting diet. There's some really good research when it comes to ketogenesis and research when it comes to epilepsy, seizures, and certain type of cancers, and it can have a mimicking effect similar to fasting, but without the food restriction there. So they're the different types of fasting. Now let's get into all the exciting benefits and the science behind fasting and why it's really become popular now. But before we get into that, we really want to start with 2 caveats. Number 1 is least effective dose. So faster is not a linear process of beneficial gain. So I'll give you a little bit of an example here. If we go to the gym and we would go to the gym about 4 hours, 7 days a week, twice a day, what that's going to start to do is overtrain the body. You're going to get inflammation. You're going to have increased rate of injury, increase your stress hormones, lower your sex hormones. You're not going to recover properly. So all the benefits of working out or training will then be nullified by you doing it too much. So fasting, similar here. You don't become immortal the harder and faster, the longer and harder you fast. In fact, the opposite happens. You actually don't get the benefits, but you're also going to create some drawbacks and some detriments to your health. So that's caveat number one, that fasting, the more you do it, the harder you do it, doesn't lead to better results or more benefit. Number two is long-term calorie restriction or nutrient deficiencies reverses any of the benefits that we're just about to go through now. So there's a fine line with fasting and malnutrition. We want to make sure that and this is where the least effective dose comes in. And so if we want to get the benefits of fasting without creating drawbacks or detriments, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a balanced fashion. So there are two caveats before we get into the benefits. So 7 benefits of fasting. So we've got, it helps us slow our cellular aging process. It can increase cell communication. Also really good for improving our brain health, helps us regulate our blood sugar better, may reduce risk of certain types of cancers, increases heart health, and also assists in fat loss. So this is probably the most exciting part of fasting, and it comes from the premise of this anti-aging aspects that fasting may have. And so before we get into that, let's briefly touch on some of the things that happens when our cells age or start to deteriorate. So the first thing that happens is they stop growing and repairing at the same rate. They resist cell apoptosis, which is cell death, which doesn't sound good, but it's very vital for our health, to get cell turnover, so we can get new functioning cells that give us a level of good health. They also release pro-inflammatory chemicals when they start aging, and these can have tissue-destroying effects. Also, it's found that these aging cells have some DNA damage, which is the shortening of the telomeres inside the DNA, inside the cell. So that's what happens when our cells go through an aging process. The other thing here is really going through what intermittent fasting does and how it comes through. And so intermittent fasting helps with apoptosis. So it helps with this cell turnover. And as we said, this cell turnover is very important for keeping us healthy and helping us age well. It also helps with something called autophagy, which is a cell's way of cleaning up damaged or dysfunctional cellular material and help recycle it. It also helps regenerate our mitochondria, and our mitochondria is super important for energizing the cell. So fasting can help all those things, which is, and that's why it's shown to have an effect on aging or slowing that process down. The other thing here is that's really interesting to know is that as cells age, it's really fascinating, but they resist this renewal process. They resist this process of apoptosis, and even though they may be damaged or no longer providing benefit to the body. And so what fasting does, it helps this turnover process accelerate, and it can have that effect. But it's important to note that although this looks like a really unique attribute to fasting, it also, if you do a general calorie deficit or a general calorie restriction, you're going to get the same benefits. So you don't necessarily have to fast to get these benefits. Calorie restriction in itself will provide these benefits. Next, we'll look into brain health. So fasting does have effect on inflammation, especially neuroinflammation, so it can bring down the inflammatory response in the brain. It also helps with blood sugar regulation, and there is some link in terms of blood sugar dysregulation in terms of Alzheimer's, and there's some would say that it's a sort of type 3 diabetes. Based on what we've just gone through in terms of the cell turnover, it also slows the brain cell aging down. It stimulates new growth in the brain in terms of cell growth. And ultimately, this is going to preserve our neurons. A note here with fasting and brain health is that the benefits some people may feel clearer, but also some people might not experience the brain benefits of fasting during a fast. They might experience a little bit of fatigue, a little bit of brain fog, but we're still getting these benefits, but they might be post our fasting experience. The next thing that fasting really helps is our ability to regulate blood sugar. So it does lower blood glucose level, which in turn will increase our insulin sensitivity. And insulin sensitivity is very important. It means the way our cells respond to insulin and allows energy into the cell. And so we want to keep our insulin resistance. It's going to help us, energize our cells and utilize energy properly. So it does have some benefits there. Again, noting, if we're doing this to an extreme, though, it can lead to hypoglycemia. So that is actually going to contribute to fatigue, can contribute to increased levels of cravings. And, so we want to be careful, again, with the caveat of what we said earlier. We don't want to overdo fasting because it can lead to some of these detriments. It's shown to improve cardiovascular health. So it does this by reducing inflammation, especially a blood marker called C-reactive protein. So it can reduce inflammation through that blood marker. It also reduces LDLs, triglycerides, and it increases our HDLs. So what's known as the good bacteria. I don't like that using that concept, but just for today, we'll just so we can get a clear picture on that. Now, the effects is increased when fasting was paired with exercise. So there's 12 times more of the effects when you're in terms of our lipid and our heart profile, when we mix fasting with our exercise, not necessarily on the same day, but mix with an exercise regime. And also these effects these anti-inflammatory effects and lipid profile effects didn't happen with healthy people in a healthy weight range with a healthy profile. It didn't have any anti-inflammatory effects or reduce the lipid profile in already healthy populations. So how it improves fat loss? So basically, real simple, it creates a calorie deficit. So, when you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to be utilizing and burning body fat. The other thing it does is it increases your insulin sensitivity. So the way you use fuel, it's going to increase your body's utilization of fuel. And if it does that, that's going to contribute to fat loss. Another thing it does, it resets our pathways to things we may be dependent on. Sugar, alcohol, coffee, anything with this addictive nature where our brain becomes addicted to, it's a really good way to reset these patterns and stop the dependency on these things. And in doing so, you're going to have some fat loss benefits. So also too much fasting, although doesn't have the same fat loss benefits and also can actually make fat loss harder. And so again, this is where the right dose comes in. So let's touch a little bit on the drawbacks now. So we've got the drawbacks of fasting. So we've gone through all the benefits. Let's touch a little bit on the drawbacks here. So first, it shares all the benefits with calorie restriction or a calorie deficit. So you actually don't have to restrict your, in terms of not eat, to get all these amazing benefits that we've gone through. Normal calorie deficits or calorie restriction can have this effect. Number two, the second impact that it may have is on the thyroid and the adrenal function. So any type of prolonged stress or prolonged malnutrition may force our brain, or a part of the brain called the hypothalamus and pituitary, to send signals to glands like the thyroid and the gonads to make less hormone or produce less hormones. And this is in order to prioritize energy elsewhere or conserve energy. And if the brain is signaling to the thyroid to make less hormone, our thyroid directly affects our metabolism. It directly affects the way we lose weight. So if we're fasting too much or if we're too stressed, we're going to have this slowed signaling to those glands to produce these hormones, and in turn, those hormones are responsible for weight loss. Another population that's really that you really got to be careful with fasting is females. As we said, it can slow the signaling to our sex hormones, and so what happens here, because a female cycle is more sensitive, females are more sensitive to nutrient and calorie restriction. So we want to really keep an eye on, if you are fasting, to make sure that it's not interrupting with your normal hormonal cycle, because it can impact that. And obviously that's going to create more detriment than it is benefit. We touched on this earlier, but hyperglycemia, so low levels of blood sugar, it can create, and that creates afternoon fatigue, yawning. It also affects our hunger hormones, our ability to be satiated, and we're feeling hungry a little bit more. So it can unlock cravings if we're doing it too aggressively. Now, if we have any type of mental challenge or physical challenge, fasting is not ideal. So it really does hamper our physical performance. And so this is why fasting shouldn't necessarily be done on days that you're training or days where you have a high mental load that you need to perform. And so super important to make sure that, we're not pairing fasting with performance, because it does shown in research to reduce your performance. Lastly, and the most important one, is malnutrition. Not getting enough calories, not getting enough nutrients really nullifies any of the benefits mentioned earlier. So we really want to be strategic in how we apply fasting, because we want to get all the benefits, but we also want to nullify the drawbacks. So in saying that, if just say if we're asking, should I fast or not? The first thing is we want to make sure that we've mastered the nutritional gatekeepers of intermittent fasting. I've termed this the gatekeepers, because if you haven't mastered these simple things, you're really not going to get the drawbacks. You're not going to get the benefits. So number one, you really want to understand what to eat. This is about food quality. We want to go high quality foods here, and PN has an amazing chart, and so we really want to stick in the green area when we come to our foods. So if we haven't mastered what we eat, that's what we have to do. Number two, we have to master when we eat. So we need to make sure that we've mastered blood sugar stabilization, and this happens, we want to eat every 3 to 4 hours. Then we want to master how much we eat. So this covers our energy requirements. So understanding how much energy we need based on our work, based on our physical performance, is super important. The other thing is, lastly, is we want to understand our natural hunger and fullness cues. There's so many people that I work with that really have lost that being in tune with their body, and they mistake more addictive food patterns for these natural intuitive hunger cues. But basically, we want to be able to understand when we're hungry and when we're full. And so these, if we haven't really got on top of this, and you can't say you have a really deep understanding of these things, then we don't really want to consider fasting until we've done that. And the reason being is this nullifies once we have a good understanding of our food quality, we get enough nutrients. When we understand our food timing, we understand how to regulate our blood sugar. And when we understand how much to eat, we have enough for our energy requirements. And then when we can listen to the body, we can really tune in there and we can really understand where we're at. Okay, so intermittent fasting schedules for different situations. So I've got a few different categories here, and what suits who best. So firstly, if you're a beginner, if you're just starting out, don't try an advanced strategy like intermittent fasting. You're going to get more benefit doing the 4 nutritional strategies and overcoming the 4 gatekeepers. From there, if you're into high performance or athletic type training, we want to use a time restricted 16-8 type methodology here. So that's going to allow you to eat within a window and period of time. and it's going to allow you to maintain your performance. People who don't like being hungry can try the 5-2 diet here. And another thing here is like when we're under stress, it's really good to combine two type of strategies. So 5-2, and in those 2 days that we're fasting, we want to do a 16-8 type approach. So an eating window. And this is really going to allow us to get the benefits because, we're not over fasting and we're also getting the nutrition in. So that I'm going to go through an intermittent fasting schedule after this that really kind of touches on, it's a really safe way to do intermittent fasting and get all the benefits. And lastly, before we go into that, people who are not stressed, you're on holidays, you're on retreats, that's where all types of fasting schedules will work. That's where you can, if you've checked with your health practitioner, that's where you can do a 24-hour fast, a 48-hour fast, and not get the detriment. So when we're not stressed, when we're on holidays, when we're doing retreats. Okay, so intermittent fasting schedule to rule them all here. Okay, so what we want to do is, this is a very simple strategy that you can integrate and that can translate where you can get all the benefits and not have those drawbacks. So firstly, we want to do a 5-2 outline. 2 fasting days a week, 1 to 2 is ideal. And we want to do them on low activity, low stress days. Okay. The other thing is for males, on those fasting days, we want to do a 2-4 or 16-8. It goes with our male hormones more sufficiently. And our fasting window should be done in the morning based on our hormones. For females, they want to do more of a 16-8 or a 14-10, and their fasting window should be an earlier dinner, so through the nighttime period. So they're actually eating breakfast in the morning. This helps nullify the effects on the hormones. Lastly, we want to stay really hydrated. One, that's going to be able to tolerate our fasting period better. It's going to, we're made up of 60% water, and we're going to get this cell turnover or this cell cleansing as we go through. So we want to make sure that we're providing enough hydration for the cells, and we're also making it easy for us not to feel too hungry during the process. So, obviously, before we start any sort of fasting regime, I do recommend, checking with your health practitioner or a professional that can help you through this. But this is in terms of where our climate today, if we're working, we're stressed, this would be, the most ideal based on all the different factors with fasting. We don't want to be fasting every day. We don't want to be going into massive calorie deficits if we're working, if we've got a high performance physically, because, we're going to be tapping into those detriments there. All right, so that concludes our session for today. So what we touched on is the history of fasting, a little bit of a touch on the origin there, and a little bit of the history of where we've used it. We touched on the different types of fasting schedules. We touched on the benefits, the drawbacks. We looked at the 4 gatekeepers of fasting that we want to master before we even consider fasting. And we looked at the different ways to choose a fasting schedule that may suit you. From here, if we're really looking to answer the question of, is fasting the silver bullet, or is it just another fad diet? I think it's really important to see any type of information, where it's nutrition or fitness, that we're really looking at it from an approach of not only what are the benefits, but what are the drawbacks. We can see here that fasting in the right situation with the right factors taken into consideration can have some amazing benefits. But also, just like anything, if overused, can not only not have the drawbacks, so not have the benefits, but lead into a detrimental space when it comes to our longevity of health. So just like our workouts, just like our cardio, it needs to be brought in a balanced fashion. Then we can reap some of the amazing benefits. If not, we're not going to get those benefits. I just want to reference today's sessions. A lot of today's information was taken by a really amazing doctor and PhD called Helen Colias. She's an amazing PhD, and she's done a whole ebook and document and research on fasting. So please check her out. She has some amazing articles and information. But that is our session for today. So thank you so much for joining. And I might just open up for questions. If not, we will wrap up.
I just have one question, Ant.
Yep.
With the hydration, I'm assuming that hydrating during the fasting period, it's calorie-free hydration.
Yeah. Really good question.
What about also, so I guess one, that the hydration during the fasting period, but also would you change the hydration during so if you were doing a 24, would you during the 4 hour have like electrolyte or nutrient-based hydration during the 4 hour, and then during the 20 hour would it be just clean, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Vince. So it really depends on the situation. So the first thing is we really want to go for when we're looking at water, right? We don't want to be drinking tap water or water that's hasn't gone through a natural mineralization process. So sometimes a lot of people's filters have natural mineralization processes, which are fine. You can add electrolytes. That's not going to affect your fast. It doesn't have in terms of its calorie density, it's not high enough to affect your fast. So, and it also is going to allow you to tolerate that fasting period and make sure that you're nourishing your body in that way. Another thing that people can use it's a little bit of a cheat, but just say if you were to have a day where your fasting falls on a day you are going to be moving more, or you've got a little bit more kind of pressure, you can use BCAAs during a training session. Although it doesn't count as a strict fast, you're still going to get the benefits, and it's just going to nullify a little bit of the drawbacks in terms of having muscle tissue breakdown while you're training or while you're moving, but it also can help with brain performance. And so yeah, I think the standard way is making sure that you're having mineralized or electrolyte water during that fasting period, because you're going to we don't hydrate through just water in itself. What creates the osmosis is the minerals within the water. And so we do want to have a higher level of hydration during this period. So we're aiming for, in that, even though if we have a small fasting window, we want to increase the hydration by at least 500 to a liter of what we would usually hydrate. So if it's 2 liters we usually hydrate, we want to make sure that we're getting at least 3 liters in that fasting period.
Perfect, thanks.
Does that answer your question, Vince?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming through, and we'll wrap it up there.